When it comes to music, every genre has an album that is the epitome of perfection, quality, and being able to stand the test of time. And in hip hop, Nas Illmatic is that album. Welcome back to the Voiceovers Podcast. I'm 24K Logan. So Nas Illmatic is officially 30 years old now, and it's crazy to think that I wasn't even born when that album came out, but just me studying 90s culture, 90s hip hop, East Coast hip hop, and being able to understand and know how important that album is, not just to East Coast hip hop, but hip hop history in general. I have to recognize the greatness of the album. I feel like any hip hop historian, any true hip hop fan should at least recognize the greatness of Illmatic, even if it's not a personal favorite of yours, even if you don't have it in your top 15 for personal favorite albums. You have to be objective every once in a while and understand the greatness of Illmatic. So let's start off like this. Nas was only 20 years old when he released Illmatic. And when you go back and you listen to the storytelling, you hear the lyricism, you hear the perfect combination of feel-good songs, grimy songs, all of that combined, it makes you really wonder how Nas was so ahead of his time with that album. And let's not forget, this is his debut album. We don't have too many albums, not just in hip hop, but music in general. We don't have too many debut albums of an artist that we consider amongst the greatest of all time or amongst the greatest of its particular genre. Illmatic is one of the very few. And when you look at Nas's entire catalog, while his entire catalog is full of quality, none of the albums have been able to live up to the genius, to the masterpiece that Illmatic was and still is to this day. I mean, it is literally a generational type of album. I feel like Illmatic is one of those albums where if you were a 90s kid, or if you were a young adult in the 90s and you remember when the album came out and how big of a deal it was, especially if you an East Coast hip hop head, you would understand how important that album is to hip hop culture, especially for East Coast. With Illmatic, and the reason why I say it's so important, not just for East Coast rap, but hip hop in general, Illmatic was released at a time where East Coast rap was slowly getting back on its feet. Of course, in the 80s, you had pioneers like Rakim, LL Cool J, KRS-One, Big Daddy Kane, and it's like Nas took the mantle from those guys, and his first ever album, he delivered us a masterpiece out of nowhere. And when you think about that and you compare it to albums that have come after it, especially for this current day and age of hip hop is desperately missing an Illmatic. I feel like in the last 10 to 15 years, roughly, the closest album that we've gotten on the level of an Illmatic, or when I'm talking about the level of Illmatic, I'm talking about the impact that it had on its generation. The impact that Illmatic had on 90s children or young adults in the 90s, I feel like in my generation, that's what Good Kid, Mad City is. I'm not saying that Good Kid, Mad City is as good as Illmatic, because I don't believe that. But I'm just saying, when you talk about the storytelling of Illmatic, the lyricism, when you listen to Illmatic, you can almost imagine yourself watching a classic 90s film like, say, Juice. That's the vibe that I get from Illmatic. Or it's almost like if you weren't born in that time period, right? You listen to Illmatic and it's like you're getting in a time machine and you're going back to the year of 1994, and Nas is literally standing next to you and he's walking you through the Queensbridge neighborhood. Of course, Queensbridge is the neighborhood or the housing project that Nas grew up in, born and raised. Nas put that entire neighborhood on the map with that album. And when we talk about New York hip hop, I think most people from New York would say that this is the greatest rap album of all time, not just for New York hip hop, but for hip hop in general. And I myself, while I can't say definitively that I think that Illmatic is the greatest rap album of all time, I think it's easily, without question, in the top 3. I'm only saying that I can't say it definitively only because I feel like there is a very, very small selection of other hip hop albums that are in contention for being the greatest rap album of all time. But if you were to say that Illmatic is the greatest rap album of all time, I would not look at you crazy. I mean, again, from the storytelling to the lyricism, the fact that, and I've said this already, but the fact that Nas at 20 years old was able to drop an album that we now consider one of the greatest, if not the greatest hip hop album of all time, is just insane and out of this world to me. I feel that Illmatic is what like automatically put Nas in that greatest rapper of all time category, or at least for the 90s decade. If there was a big 3 of the 90s, kind of like how there is a big 3 of the 2010s and the current decade that we're in so far, Illmatic would be the album that put Nas into that conversation. And when we're just talking about the songs from Illmatic, the perfect balance of good songs, depressing songs, or not depressing songs, but Illmatic, you have your ups, you have your downs. And I'm not talking about the quality of the album, I'm talking about the mood of each song, or the mood of different songs throughout the album. You have a feel-good song like World Is Yours, which is probably the greatest hook on a hip-hop song ever. It's definitely an argument to be made. I'm not going to ruin the hook by singing it. Almost I had to catch myself. I was about to start singing it. That's how much I enjoy that hook. But you have a feel-good song like World Is Yours. You have a song where it's almost like a defeatist mindset with Life's a Bitch, but at the same time, it's very realistic to the mindset of a lot of these people living in the inner city neighborhoods, especially during that time. Very realistic. Then you have a song that is very grimy, very gritty, dark, ruthless, like New York State of Mind. I mean, even the instrumental itself is somewhat intimidating and very raw and gritty, and just sounds very New York, like very hardcore, old school New York hip hop. And in that song, of course, Nas is telling us, the listeners, about the things going on around him in his neighborhood. Now, my personal favorite song off of Illmatic would have to be One Love. And I think it's because of the storytelling aspect of it. Him writing a letter to a friend that is doing a bid in prison, and he's, telling him how his girl switched up on him, and, people getting shot in his neighborhood, things like that. Again, very realistic. And I feel that with Illmatic, it's one of those albums where you just had to be there. If you were a 90, or if you are a 90s kid, or you were a very young adult in the 90s, and you're old enough to obviously remember when the album came out, I believe that's the group of people that can make the strongest argument for Illmatic being the greatest album of all time. To be quite frank, again, there are a very, very short list of rap albums that come close to Illmatic, and especially when we're talking about the storytelling album. The only other albums that I can think of that even come half as close to Illmatic in terms of the storytelling aspect would be Biggie's Ready to Die. That was his debut album. Rest in peace, Biggie. Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. Not too many more albums that I can think of where it is just perfect storytelling all throughout, combined with lyricism, some heartfelt songs, some depressing songs, if you will, but tells a sad but very truthful reality. When we're talking about New York hip hop, Illmatic is arguably the epitome for that. The raw, gritty, hardcore sound of New York hip hop, the essence of New York hip hop, especially for the 90s. Illmatic is the golden standard. Like, Illmatic is the standard. It's Illmatic, and then I'm not gonna say it's Illmatic and it's everything else, because I do think an album like Ready to Die is on the same level of an Illmatic, but again, the storytelling is just out of this world with Illmatic. And I also think that Illmatic is a true testament to New York MCs, or the New York MCs that came before Nas. As I mentioned, Rakim, KRS-One, Big Daddy Kane, LL Cool J. I think that Illmatic is kind of a testament to those guys, but then it's also even more so a testament to the upbringing of Nas, the things that he witnessed in Queensbridge, and the things that he was witnessing as a young adult, or even if it wasn't him himself, his story in Illmatic is very relatable to a lot of young black men at that time in that same exact neighborhood, or just all throughout New York. And I think that's why there has been such a strong argument for Nas being the king of New York hip hop, if you will, because of Illmatic, because he was 20 years old when he released the album. It was his debut album, and I think, quite frankly, the people that are old enough to remember when Illmatic first came out, I think they can attest to this more than I can. But I don't think that there was anything like Illmatic prior to Illmatic. The type of storytelling that you get from Illmatic, the lyricism, the messages, the conscious rap that Nas had displayed in that album. I don't think that for an entire hip hop album, I don't think that we had that in hip hop prior to Illmatic. And I think that's just another reason why the album is so beloved to this day, held to high regard. Again, there are so many arguments for Illmatic being the greatest rap album of all time. I don't know if I 100% agree with it, but I do think that it is a strong argument. And if somebody was to tell me that they believe Illmatic is the greatest rap album of all time, I will not look at them crazy. I might not even argue with them, because it's such a strong argument to make. There's not really any flaws that you can point to from Illmatic. I think the beat selection for certain songs possibly could have been a little better, but I don't even know if I can say that. When you have someone like a Q-Tip producing your album, there's not really too many flaws that you can point to with that. But all in all, man, I mean, Illmatic, timeless album. I mean, like, what more can you say? Timeless album, true masterpiece, arguably the greatest, if not the greatest rap album of all time. And it is just a testament to Nas and how much of a genius he was at the time, and how much of a genius he still is, and again, how ahead of his time he was. I mean, a 20-year-old releasing an album of that quality, an album of that caliber, is just insane. And honestly, I don't think we've seen nothing like that in hip hop before. I mean, I don't think I could have released something like that at the age of 20. Who knows? I don't think that we'll ever see something like that again, and not that it's all about his age, but you don't expect. And I think because hip hop has changed so much throughout the years, And I do have to say that the quality at times have gone down a bit. I just don't think we'll ever see something like Illmatic again. Shout out to Nas. This is a true masterpiece. Recently, I have found myself going back to listen to this album more and more, especially for the storytelling aspect of it. This album will live on forever, without question. It's a generational album, a timeless masterpiece. What more can I say? But I appreciate everybody that tuned in and watched. Thank you guys so much for all the support that you've been showing us. We won't let y'all down. We got plenty of content on the way. Comment down below what y'all think about Illmatic, man. If you're old enough to remember when this album came out, what was or what is your best memory of it? Where do you rank it all time amongst other hip hop albums and just other albums in general? But we got plenty of content on the way. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. And until next time, peace and love to everybody.